Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bells Must Ring podcast. I am your host, Andrew Rice, here with my usual co host, Arnav Sarkar. Got a little bit of a special episode for you guys today, helping us to preview Rutgers' matchup against Iowa this Friday. JP from Blackheart Gold Pants, which is Iowa's SB Nation page. Kind of like exactly what we do there, what we do over here, but covering Iowa. Just to start off, we wanted to get to know you a little bit. What got you into Iowa? What made you start covering them? Is this something that you plan to like launch into a full-time career? Or is this just something that you do for fun?
Yeah, definitely not something I'm planning to launch into a career. As you guys well know, the folks at SB Nation don't pay quite well enough to fully support that as a career path. But in terms of how I kind of got into this, I'm an Iowa kid, born and raised. I grew up out in the middle of nowhere on the farm fields of Iowa. Went to the University of Iowa and just never left Iowa City here. So I've been in Iowa City for 18 years now, and have been covering the Hawkeyes for Blackheart Gold Pants for almost a decade. So I really started up here as a writer back in 2016, did that for a couple years, and then we had a little bit of a change, and I've been the managing editor here for I think 8 years now. So yeah, it's been a good time. Obviously, some ups and downs for the Hawkeyes in that time period, and getting to play Rutgers a little bit more here recently. So I'm excited to talk with you guys about the Hawkeyes and Scarlet Knights.
As are we. Just give us a little bit of context. Like, what was your highlight of your moment as a Hawks fan? Or because I personally have like a couple games that I can point to that just I grew up with the Scarlet Knights, but I have a couple games that I could point to that just made me fall in love. Do you have anything like that? Like just one game, maybe an upset?
Yeah, I would say, the highest moment of my Hawkeye fandom came on the CJ Beathard 85-yard bomb to Devon Smith in the Big Ten championship game. I think the low point of my Hawkeye fandom came either shortly thereafter when they lost the game or, a few weeks later when Christian McCaffrey made us look like fools on national television, the Rose Bowl. But if I think back to, my childhood and kind of what really brought me into full-on love for the Hawkeyes, I would say there was the Tate to Holloway throw against LSU for the win in the Outback Bowl. Was kind of right in the middle of my high school days. I obviously had grown up watching the Hawkeyes here in Iowa. My parents were Iowa fans, but then seeing that play, the win, that one kind of sealed it for me.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you have several big moments on a national stage like that, it really helps, I guess, entrench your fandom.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there have been quite a few notable ones. We've come up short a few times too, but one of the fun things about being an Iowa fan, especially as a local here in Iowa City, is they do have a lot of history kind of on that big stage against ranked opponents. It's ironic, I think when the Iowa faithful that are supportive of Kirk Ferentz think about what has really solidified him as, a legendary coach has been obviously the length of his tenure here in Iowa City, but then some of those wins, especially under the lights against ranked opponents in Kinnick Stadium. And then if you look back now, as we talk about those highlights, the lowlights here more recently have been, we've had a really successful run, but really nothing against ranked opponents. I think that's been kind of the one knock. You mentioned pre-show here. We may talk a little bit about, how folks are feeling about the record and all that good stuff. That's been definitely the one thing that I think has hung over Ferentz here recently is just the lack of success against ranked opponents. It feels like, those really key pivotal moments for fans that, solidify your fandom have been fewer and far between here more recently. So definitely a reason for some concern here among Hawkeye fans.
Well, that makes sense, especially when you have an established culture of winning. An established culture of going 8-4. A lot of the 10 years in a row, at least 8 wins. you expect to be able to punch above your weight class in a few of those competitions.
Mhm.
But speaking from a personal note, obviously, Ferentz recently has become a polarizing figure in the Iowa faithful. Is there any like way that you lean? Do you have like any strong feelings about Ferentz's tenure at this point?
Yeah, it's definitely become, I would say, more of a flashpoint. Obviously, there's been some stuff, um, more off the field type stuff in recent years that uh, can kind of split the fan base. So, back in the day, we had the Rabdo cases, and then we had the racial injustice stuff that happened, 5, 6 years ago. And then you follow that up with the nepotism with Brian Ferentz as the offensive coordinator. And I think that is the one through it all that has really kind of splintered the fan base, because that's where it was most evident that winning wasn't always the most important thing. I think it was very obvious to Hawkeye fans very early on that while Brian might be a great offensive line coach, he might be a great tight ends coach, he is not an offensive coordinator. And to watch an already struggling offense just get turned into a complete national laughing stock, that really, I think, turned a lot of Hawkeye fans against Ferentz. So I would certainly say that rubbed me the wrong way, but I still kind of fall into the camp of it's tough to walk away from somebody, to your point, that's really just not losing a lot of games. So, while we'd obviously love to see more success in some of the big games, it's tough to make a coaching change with somebody that just set the record for wins as a Big Ten coach. That's
Mhm.
right on pace for being a Hall of Famer at the end of the day, and that's just not losing more than 4 or 5 games in any given year. So. Um, Obviously, I'd like to see more. I'd like to see higher highs, but the lack of the low lows, I think, to me, means that Kirk Ferentz is going to be here until he's ready to hang him up.
Speaking of records at the end of the year, do you have like any insight of where you might see Iowa at the end of this year? Do you think it's going to be more of the same? Do you think they have something special brewing? Um, Anything like on the what could happen to Iowa at the end of the year?
Yeah, I think if you had asked me that, a couple weeks ago, and we did ask our community that, and obviously put out our own predictions. So my preseason prediction for the Hawks was 9-3. That actually was right in line with kind of our consensus across the community. If you look at the schedule, we've got, we had the road trip to Iowa State. Obviously came out on the wrong end of that one. We've got a home matchup with a ranked Indiana team here in a couple weeks, and then a pair of top 10 home matchups against Penn State and Oregon on the docket, before you factor in going on the road to Wisconsin, Nebraska, that always are kind of tough rivalry matchups for the Hawkeyes. So preseason, I felt pretty confident that we were going to see an improvement on the offense this year. It's always easy to trust Phil Parker on the defensive side of the ball. Felt like 9-3 was kind of that sweet spot of assuming you're going to lose two of those top 10 matchups and then split somewhere else. Um, that view, I think, has shifted for me personally, and I think if you polled our community again, you'd see the under drop pretty meaningfully. I know preseason, the folks at FanDuel had us at 7.5 total wins. I think pretty much everybody was hammering the over on that here in Hawkeye Nation. I think now 7.5 seems much more realistic, and I think you'd probably be, most folks would be right on either side of that. So, um, the offense, we can dive in a little bit more here, but the offense has really not looked as improved as we had hoped. So some of that's been some injuries, but we were pretty excited about the prospect of bringing in Mark Gronowski from South Dakota State, two-time national champion. Really had a different dynamic than we've seen. Historically, Kirk Ferentz has really liked his kind of statuesque quarterbacks. It's interesting. We talk about, the glory days back in the early 2000s, we really had some mobile quarterbacks, and that's when we seem to have had the most success on offense, is when we've had guys like Brad Banks or Drew Tate. Even Ricky Stanzi in the late 2000s was more mobile than we've had more recently. And then, like I mentioned, CJ Beathard was a mobile guy back in 2015. But he's really shied away from that. And so getting someone like Gronowski, who was billed as a mobile quarterback, who also could complete the downfield passes, pair that with year 2 of Tim Lester at the helm for the offense. He runs a little bit more of an RPO-based modern offense than we've seen in recent years, and felt like we maybe finally had the pieces to actually see some real meaningful improvement. Obviously, we had a solid offense a year ago that was really led by, Caleb Johnson. I think Lester got here, had visions for what he wanted to do, and then we ran into, some limitations in the receiver room and the quarterback room, and really found a strength in Caleb Johnson early on and just leaned into that running game. So we were very excited about the prospect of being more balanced, throwing the ball around a little bit more this year. And what we've seen through 3 games is just that's not really, it's really not been on the
Yeah.
docket. A week ago they made an effort to really kind of show that they could throw the ball. That's one thing against UMass, and it's a totally different thing in the Big Ten. So from an offensive standpoint, I think fans are really pessimistic about the rest of the way here. And then the defense, I would say, is kind of in line with what we've come to expect. They, candidly, I think we were a lot more nervous about the secondary. They've been, by and large, okay so far. I think what they showed against Iowa State was maybe some optimism for the rest of us, but they haven't created a turnover on defense yet through 3 games, and that's something we haven't seen in a long time. The Iowa defense is really built around kind of that bend but don't break mentality, forcing an offense to, grind it out for 9, 10, 11 plays, go the length of the field, play field position, and then eventually count on an offense to make mistakes. And so far this year, we just haven't seen them force those mistakes. So, fingers crossed that eventually we'll get there. I'm not holding my breath this week with the way that the Rutgers Scarlet Knights have been playing on offense, and Callie Akmanis has been incredible so far. So we really need the defense to step up to really be super confident in this one, just given the way the offense has played so far.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it really is just to start getting into that preview of Iowa Rutgers. Before we get into that, though, Arnav, did you have any questions that you wanted to add? Anything I didn't ask?
Yeah, I was just, I guess for Rutgers fans, like, we've never beaten Iowa. It's like always kind of a difficult one because it feels like Rutgers has kind of been like Iowa light, and then the matchup happens and it's kind of not. And then Iowa's also similarly been like kind of one step up, even from like maybe Minnesota, or although Washington's roster is talented. But I mean, given where Iowa is, like, should Rutgers fans kind of be looking at this, like, looking up this year, or kind of be looking at this, like, more like we might be on the same footing? Because I feel like Iowa's still maybe a half step to 1 step up from even a middle of the pack tier. Like, I guess I just don't want Rutgers fans to be daunted this year, and I just don't know if Iowa's worth looking at that like that. But at the same time, like, I guess where does Iowa also, like, stack up in the Big Ten? Because themselves, they're also maybe not really seen as, like, truly a playoff contender like in Illinois or Indiana, but still maybe like floating around the 8-win mark, slightly above like a Rutgers, Minnesota, Washington, Nebraska, like to team like that.
Yeah, I think that's very fair for kind of where we view ourselves, and I think where we're perceived nationally. And frankly, it's a tough spot to be. If this were pro sports, right, that's the worst spot to be, where you're just kind of like hanging right around. You're not in a rebuild, but you're not really a contender. And so, it's a tough spot as a fan to be kind of in that place perpetually. Like I said, it's nice not to have the low lows of a rebuild, but the flip side is there's certainly a ceiling that feels like it's on top of us. So I think we were hopeful that maybe we were going to be better than that this year. Like I said, with the thoughts on Gronowski and year 2 of Tim Lester's offense, because really the defense has been, borderline elite for almost a decade, and it's been the offense that's really held things back. And so I think, if I'm a Rutgers fan, I view this year's Iowa team as probably taking a little bit of a step back on defense. So, the way that the Scarlet Knight offense has played so far, I would be pretty optimistic about that matchup relative to past years. And then obviously, I think from our perspective, we're looking at this game as a litmus test for the rest of the year. If the offense looks the same way it did the first 2 weeks this week, then it's going to be a really long year for Hawkeye fans. If the offense comes out and looks anything like it did against UMass, our perspective maybe shifts back to where we were preseason. So, I don't have a good answer for you on how you should be thinking about it. I can tell you how we're thinking about it. And it certainly feels like this is a really pivotal game for Iowa on the season. And frankly, traveling out east for a Friday night game doesn't feel great for being in that situation where it does feel like a must win to kind of keep the season on track. And I'm sure that the players and staff feel similarly that this is a game that they absolutely have to have. So would prefer to have it in Kinnick, would prefer to have it on a Saturday. But here we are.
Well, I guess we've done enough dancing around the topic to begin with. Now it's time to get into the meat and potatoes. We've been kind of, at least through our previews, we've been assessing this game as a battle of strength on strength versus, I guess, weak point on weak point, with Rutgers offense matching up against Iowa's defense, and then Rutgers defense matching up against Iowa's offense. We're not used to saying that our defense is our weak point. Usually it's our offense that has to slug down the field. But it's just kind of like interesting how we used to be a very similar built team to Iowa, and then this year it just completely flipped.
Yeah, I think, Arnav, you mentioned that you felt like Rutgers has kind of been built in the same way as Iowa. And I would say, certainly under Greg Schiano, it feels that way. And historically, teams that have tried to kind of out Iowa have fallen short.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel like maybe this is a year where it can be done. So, Iowa State, obviously, it's rival. Matt Campbell has kind of done a similar thing there where he's really tried to build around the defense. They started off with more of an open spread offense when he first got there, but have slowly kind of morphed into a much better version of what Iowa's offense could be, leaning on the tight ends and kind of the strengths of what we have here from a talent perspective in the Midwest, build around the offensive line, the big tight ends. They've done a much better job recruiting receivers, and Matt Campbell, I think, has proven over time that he's a really good talent evaluator at the running back position. And so this is the year where they finally, I feel like, out Iowa'd us. And it does feel like maybe that could be a scenario that we see again on Friday night where, the Iowa defense is I think, good, but not great. And if they don't create those turnovers, it does feel like a situation where, Rutgers can put up some points. And then on the other side of the ball, obviously, the defense, I think, for Rutgers, if they can focus solely on the running game, that makes it much more difficult for Iowa, just given how they've really lacked that downfield passing game. So, I mentioned a couple injuries that we've been dealing with. We're missing our starting tight end, missing our only starting receiver that's over 5'10". So you're going to see 4 or 5 guys thrown out there at receiver, and they're all not big guys. So there's really nothing on the outside. There's nothing coming across the middle to be kind of intimidated by in the passing game. And then, those receivers are small, but they're not the fastest guys in the world either. So there's a reason they ended up here. And they're not really stretching the field in the way that you'd like to be able to draw guys out of the box. So it does feel like a game where Rutgers should be able to kind of stack the box, focus on stopping the run game, and force Gronowski to try to beat him over the top. And I think that's really what this one's going to come down to is, is he able to do that? Is Tim Lester able to dial up enough stuff to kind of keep the Knights honest defensively? And then can the Iowa defense finally create a turnover? Because that really has just been lacking so far.
Well, we've been talking about how Iowa's offense matches up against Rutgers defense. And the one thing that personally scares me as a Rutgers fan is that they have looked very poor against the run. They have set up at least 5.6 yards per carry or 5.2 yards per carry. For even against, Norfolk State, an average of 5, at least over 5 yards a carry against teams from a lower level. So personally, it's been a lot of concern with how Rutgers' defensive line is going to stack up against Iowa's offensive line. And that was something that I kind of highlighted as a key matchup in this game. Rutgers' defensive line doesn't have any studs. However, they seem to have a lot of guys that are just okay, but the guy behind them is just the same amount of okay as the guy in front of them. So it's going to be interesting to see like how they use that depth. They're definitely going to be rotating, digging deep into the lines, but that is something that I highlighted as a marquee matchup. Iowa's offensive line versus Rutgers defensive line.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I think that the Rutgers' ability to focus on just stopping the run is really going to be what this comes down to. If they can, put 8 guys in the box and effectively slow down Iowa rushing attack, then they're going to be in really good shape. Iowa does have a pretty solid offensive line. Right tackle Jennings Dunker is kind of the one that gets most of the national headlines, not only because he's a very solid offensive lineman, but he also looks the part. He's got a nice flowing shoulder length mullet going on. It's fire truck red, and he's got a pretty sweet mustache and the full arm tattoos. So he looks the part of that big intimidating Big Ten offensive lineman, and he kind of plays to it. So, but beyond him, the rest of the offensive line is overall, I would say above average for a Big Ten offensive line. What will be interesting for Iowa this week is, we really haven't had kind of cohesion in the running game so far. So Kamari Moulton has been the starting running back. He's been out the last couple weeks. He's expected to be back this week, but it must be like a 1 in, 1 out type situation at the Hawkeye training facility. They are missing their who's been effectively the starting running back the last 3 weeks. Xavier Williams is a freshman who's been off to an incredible start. He ran for a freshman record in his first game against Albany back in week 1, and has looked very solid for the Hawkeyes as kind of a north-south runner. He's a big body. Would say he's kind of the punisher, the guy you think of in the fourth quarter as being able to finish a game. So being without him will be interesting to watch how Iowa adjusts to that. Moulton has definitely got more of a burst, but he's certainly not the power back that we would have in Xavier Williams. So it'll be interesting to see how they adapt the running game with him back. And then I would expect to see a heavy dose of Jazz Patterson, who is another one that he's an upperclassman that hadn't played a whole lot early on in week 1, and then showed up again against Iowa State. And then was pretty solid again last week. So I think, Iowa certainly wants to establish the run. They're averaging over 200 yards a game on the ground. I would look for them to focus on that early. I think, one of the criticisms that the fan base had of Lester, particularly against Iowa State in week 2, was that he really tried to kind of lean on that too long. There was stuff there to be taken downfield, and it really feels like Lester is dependent on those halftime adjustments. So he's got a game script to come out to. He's got a game plan to stick to for the first half, and then really likes to adjust at halftime. And it was frustrating to watch, just kind of run into a stacked box over and over and over again for 2-3 yards in a cloud of dust when there was stuff to be had downfield. But I would expect to see something similar Friday night, just trying to find, poke and prod, see what works, see if they can kind of lean on that front four of the Knights, and then go to play action, make some adjustments in the second half. So we'll see how that run game plays out. I do think that is absolutely a key matchup.
Yeah. Speaking of another key matchup, well, I just wanted to confirm that was it confirmed that Xavier Williams will not be playing in this game, or was it just kind of speculation?
Yeah, Xavier Williams will be out. So we'll be without Xavier Williams. Addison Ostrenga is our starting tight end who will be out. And then Reese Vanderzee is the big X receiver that will also be out. So three big weapons for the Iowa offense that's already struggling that will not be there. So Ostrenga's been out for a couple weeks here. So I think the offense has kind of adapted to that at this point. Vanderzee similarly has been out almost the entire season, and he missed most of last season as well. So again, I think we've kind of seen the strategy around those. It'll be interesting to see what they do, I think, in the running game, just because Moulton and Williams are very different runners.
We're kind of like on the flip side because especially with Shiano and Rutgers, they don't like to reveal their hand until like three hours before kickoff. We have no idea who's going to be who. Like we have a bunch of people that are questionable, but we have no idea who's actually going to be out.
Yeah.
Ian Strong is still listed as questionable. If he can't go, that's going to be a big loss. Wide receiver, he caught
Mhm.
over 100 yards in the first 2 games of the season. Did not appear versus Norfolk State, but we were led to believe that was mostly precautionary. But we'll see where it goes from
Yeah, we'll
here.
see.
Yeah, and then Tyler Needham, he left the Norfolk State game with an injury. He was able to get up and walk under his own power, so not to speculate. Maybe we could be getting him back. And then running back CJ Campbell also sustained an injury in the game versus Norfolk State. He looked a lot rougher coming off the field. He was immediately like rushed to the tent, had people carrying him, stuff like that. So I don't want to say it's safe to say he won't be playing, but I have a very good feeling that he will not be available for this game. But just kind of it's kind of interesting because of where Rutgers is losing a lot of its players. It seems to have a lot of very capable players right behind him. Antoine Raymond in the running back room. Um, KJ Duff had Ian Strong doesn't play. KJ Duff has a breakout game. So it's very interesting to see how these two go off to each other. Arnav, did you have something you wanted to add?
I mean, yeah, like you said, I mean, Ian Strong, I think as good as a receiver he is. I mean, KJ Duff is pretty solid. DT Sheffield's another one to watch out for. He had a deep touchdown against Ohio. I think Norfolk State, he's like a very, slot speedy guy. They got him out of North Texas. He was very good there. So he's also dropped some passes, but he's, usually a pretty solid receiver to watch out for. And KJ Duff, very similar, Strong, also can make big time catches. And then if Strong can't go, they'll put Ben Black in, who's a true speedster. He ran track. He's gained some experience, and he's started to put that on tape and on the field this year. He had a touchdown against Norfolk. And then running back room, Antoine Raymond, definitely he's kind of in that Monangai mold. He's like kind of that bruising back that Rutgers has kind of had, and he's become the lead back now for the Scarlet Knights this year. So he's been RB1, I guess, but Campbell's been a solid RB2, kind of a little bit more of a finesse back, I guess, and makes better, cuts, things like that. But then our other running back, Deshaun Benjamin, who's kind of like our RB3, I guess, is, also kind of similar, where he makes a lot of good cuts and he's a little bit more shifty. So I feel like Rutgers, even if Campbell can't go, should be okay. Receiver Ian Strong, obviously, like him to be there, but they should have the reinforcements. But the one that has me the most worried is obviously the left tackle, because Rutgers has been down multiple guys. They lost Ryder Langsdale in the he came in the transfer portal. They lost him for the season. He was at least in contention to be the starting left tackle, if not outright. And then they lost Dante Chin, who ended up in that slot because of some injuries. He played really well. They were impressed. He got injured. And then finally, and then now on Tyler Needham, who started in that position like last year, they were relying on him, I guess, to step up. He's like might not be in, even if he comes back for the season, he might not be back for this game. So it's just like, they're down to they're kind of their back three. Like obviously, I think the expectation now is Mashoud Giwa, who transferred in from LIU. He ended up starting the rest of the game against Norfolk State. Looked pretty good too, but obviously the Iowa defensive front is a whole different beast than, with no offense, but, to Norfolk State's defensive front. So I'm a little bit worried about, I think that's the one position where I think Rutgers fans, like, that one could be, I mean, that could be a little bit of a backbreaker, because if that, if that's the one position that slows down the offense, and on top of that, you're down a receiver and a running back, I mean, that could be a problem. I mean, if Rutgers is truly relying on their offense to win this game, which is a flip from previous years, you don't want to have, injuries, and you definitely don't want to have one on the O-line, which can wreck an entire football game. So hopefully, like, Rutgers can hold up in those spots.
I think the offensive line injuries is a key point. If I think about Iowa's defense, I mentioned they haven't created a turnover yet this year. I think a big part of that, historically, Phil Parker has really liked to kind of sit in his base defense in a shell, like I said, and just kind of, we call it like the Python. He just kind of sits back and slowly coils around the offense, and then slowly suffocates them, waiting for, them to make a mistake on their own. That really hasn't been able to happen this year, just because we haven't been able to kind of create enough pressure up front. So I think if Iowa can actually create pressure up front with their front four against, a banged up offensive line, sit back and play the zone effectively, creating a turnover is certainly, a place that Iowa's kind of made their hay historically. And if they can do that through creating pressure up front without having to bring extra blitzers to, generate pressure, move guys out of position, shift out of that base 4-2-5 cover 2. I think that would certainly help the Iowa defense.
I think it's interesting about how that kind of like coil analogy that you used, because it almost seems like this game is going to be determined by who can drag the other team into their style of play.
Yeah.
Like if Rutgers can drag Iowa into a somewhat high-scoring shootout, take advantage of maybe some mismatches on the DBs because our wide receiver core has been better than expected, a very pleasant surprise. But then on the flip side, if Iowa can kind of drag us into a ugly defensive slog, as we come to call Iowa ball.
Yeah, it used to be Rutgers.
We like to call it the rock fight. We like to drag everybody into a rock fight and hopefully have a bigger rock.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say I'm not too confident that our rock is up to standard.
Yeah,
especially with the way that running backs have been running on our defense, our defensive line, but really on the whole defense. And Rutgers has also been allowing big plays, I guess, both through the air and in the run game. But I mean, I think more so as a run game, they've particularly struggled against mobile quarterbacks. We saw Parker Navarro of Ohio, which I'm really impressed with what Ohio's done this season, by the way, too. But I mean, Navarro's a mobile quarterback. DeQuan Finn is a mobile quarterback from Miami, Ohio, and even like Norfolk State as well. I mean, they've been able to find big plays on the ground. And I mean, the first two teams also had some success through the air as well, but I mean, especially on the ground. So I mean, if Rutgers can force Iowa into like some sort of a shootout or something where they, even like high 20s, low 30s, and force Iowa to play, force Gronowski to, really like operate in the pass, make Iowa kind of one-dimensional, then maybe Rutgers can start bringing in some of the pass rush with Eric O'Neill, Bradley Weaver, and the home crowd. That could also maybe play a factor. Rutgers probably has the advantage, but if it becomes like you guys are saying, like a rock fight, and then Rutgers, especially the way with their defense is, they've not been able to win those against Iowa, and this year it might go even worse, given the way the state of our defense is. But it's going to be a battle of styles, like make fights, as people say. But which style can win? Can Rutgers, really get that offense cranked up, or can Iowa, kind of play ball control and, kind of hit home on defense as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely with that.
Yeah. Just did want to kind of like shoot some stats out especially about the two matchups that we kind of highlighted. Rutgers quarterback Ethan Kalikmanis has thrown for 820 yards through 72.9% completion percentage, 7 touchdowns. Hasn't really quite had a defense that would challenge him, but obviously that's going to change with Iowa coming to town, especially, and I'm hoping I'm saying this name right, Max Llewellyn?
Llewellyn.
Llewellyn. Okay.
Llewellyn.
Him coming off the edge, that especially with 3 sacks already on the year, doesn't sound like he's gonna, let Kalikmanis have a siesta back there. which especially against a 4th string offensive tackle, I'm really sweating that one. I won't lie.
Got me a little bit worried. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a key matchup. Like I said, if you can get Llewellyn coming off the edge, Iowa has a pretty solid front four. I would say, coming into the season, that was certainly viewed as a strength. We lost a pair of all Big Ten, and including an All-American at linebacker last year with Nick Jackson. Gosh, Hawkeye fans are going to kill me on this. I'm blanking on his name. He's for the Ravens now, Jay Higgins. So you lose those two guys and kind of look to replace them with new linebackers this year. Our secondary was not fantastic a year ago, and then we kind of are replacing a pair on the outside there as well. And so I think the back of that defense has been a concern, but the front four has really been what we were hoping to lean on. They just haven't been able to generate a ton of pressure so far. Llewellyn's been the exception for sure with 3 sacks. I think, Aaron Graves at defensive tackle has been great at eating up blockers, and Phil Parker's tried to use that to kind of generate pressure out of the back of the defense. But if they can generate pressure up front with the front four, especially against a beat up offensive line, kind of push Guy Akmanis to a certain side of the field, or just kind of speed up that clock a little bit. I think that's really critical in this one. Like I said, Iowa's kind of, they're built around forcing opponents into, some trick plays, some shots down the field that just backfire. And if they can kind of get, the offensive Rutgers into that mindset where they're impatient, they're sped up, they're forcing decisions quicker, and trying to, hit that home run ball, I think that's where we could finally see, something shift in this one. Otherwise, it's probably just going to be that rock fight. Honestly, I think, the best shot for Rutgers in this one is if they just are willing to be patient and take the underneath stuff. So Iowa sits very patiently, kind of in that shell defense in the zone. 5-yard curls and outs are there basically all day. And I think Rutgers has the talent at the skill positions to take a 5-yard out route and turn it into a 8, 9, 10-yard play pretty easily. I think where they could run into some troubles, like I said, if that clock gets sped up and now you're in 3rd and long, or they get impatient and take some shots down the field, and you end up in a turnover situation. That's where the Iowa defense has really kind of been built on over the last 15 years.
Yeah, and especially with the way Rutgers' offense was portrayed in the first 2 weeks, we really don't know how exactly they're going to attack this Iowa defense, because they really, if you're going back and watching their film, they really give you nothing. It seems like they kind of, obviously this is not true, but half the time it feels like they ran the same 15 plays over and over and over again. They really did not dig into their bag of tricks at all. So it's going to be interesting to see if they have some more underneath routes, I guess, planned, because they did take some bigger opponents, deep shift, cage a couple times. Over the middle too, but Iowa's linebackers are obviously going to be, I would say, a little bit harder hitting than the Ohio linebackers.
Yeah.
But it's going to be interesting to see. Maybe we even get some more involvement out of tight ends like Kenny Fletcher and Colin Weber, stuff like more involvement from those positions. Possibly some more running back involvement in the passing game. Although it is the kind of mainstream belief that with the left tackle injuries, the running back is going to be more so a blocking role from now on. Do you have anything you want to expand on that, Arnav?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely interesting, about the stuff you said about the underneath routes being something to exploit. I was kind of hoping maybe Rutgers would have some downfield movement, but that could also be a bit of a risk if Iowa brings pressure. And yeah, you obviously want to take what the defense gives you. And if the stuff is in the middle of the field or even towards the sides, 5 yards here, and we have receivers that could definitely move the chains in those situations. But I guess what I would like to see is a mix of the run and the pass, because as good as the passing game has been for Rutgers, the run game's also been pretty solid. I mean, obviously led by Antoine Raymond. Like I mentioned, Sean Benjamin maybe stepping in the role. Maybe Campbell can go either way. And also the offensive line, it's called, we like to call it winning the line of scrimmage, but they've so far against their first 3 opponents, they have been able to do that. They've been able to get maybe 5-6 yards a carry or something around that pretty consistently. So I don't know, maybe against Iowa's defensive front, that's going to be tougher, but I would say that Rutgers should be able to have a balanced attack, and it's not just going to be all passing plays and not much run. I think we get a little bit of both, and that's, I think, a good way to attack a solid defense is by trying to mix it up. Like you said about our defense, trying to keep them honest and, guessing a little bit and, chunk your way down the field. And if the deep play opens up at some point, maybe they can go for it. But I'd say consistently, mixing up the run, the pass probably be the best way to go about this one.
Yeah, I think if I were Rutgers, I think taking those underneath throws and then using the pass to kind of set up the run feels like the best approach here. I think back to some of the major frustration Hawkeye fans have had over the years facing against Northwestern under Pat Fitzgerald. They really felt like a team that was outmanned against Iowa, but always kind of had our number. And as a Hawkeye fan, we always just used to say it was like getting just 1,000 paper cuts watching that, because they're taking like a 2-3 yard out route over and over and over and over, and picking up, catching it 2-3 yards, turn it into 4 or 5 yards, move the chains, and just they would take everything that we would give them. And that Iowa defense is, like I said, built on assuming that the opponent either is going to make a mistake and get into a long yardage situation at some point, or get impatient with that approach and take a shot down the field and then get behind the chains or have a turnover. So Northwestern for years was just very comfortable, paper cutting us to death, taking those 3-4 yards at a time, 12, 13, 14 plays, and turn it into points. And then kind of flip the script on us and hope that we would make a mistake on offense. And so I think, from Rutgers this year, that feels like a recipe for success is, just take that underneath stuff on the passing game, use the pass to set up the run. If I was a Rutgers fan, I would be nervous about them taking shots down the field. Not that Iowa's secondary is tremendous. It's just that, I think that's where teams have had issues historically against Iowa. Is once you get impatient, you try to take that shot. If you take the shot, you better hit it. Otherwise, things go south in a hurry.
Yeah, I saw Catholic Menace in our Norfolk State game. It feels like against Norfolk State, Rutgers was kind of almost experimenting a little bit. Like they went for an onside and they didn't get in. They're just like, whatever. I was like, maybe, some people are speculating maybe they're putting things on tape. And even in the past game, he was kind of airing it out. He missed a couple, and I was like, oh boy, that's making me a little nervous. They called one back on DT Sheffield, who had one, and then he hit a couple, and I was like, okay, well, maybe they're trying to fire something up for a potential deep play. But yeah, I mean, I like what you're saying about using the pass to set up the run. I mean, take a few, set up a third down and short. And I think our running backs, will be able to pick those things up based on what I've seen the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, just to add to that too, it feels like, especially in the last couple contests that we have seen, it seems like Calic Manis is smart where he is throwing the ball, but sometimes he's not putting the right kind of air under it, because there was times where DT was open, and he saw DT was open, made the read, threw the ball, and it just came out like a rocket.
It was like 5 yards over the head, and I was just like, yeah, that's not great right now. But yeah, a little bit inconsistent over there, I would say, yeah.
So I'm hoping that we, obviously, as you've mentioned, Iowa takes advantage of plenty of mistakes. Can't afford to have that kind of mistake. It kind of had a little bit of shades of Gavin Wimsatt when he was here.
Oh my god!
When he would throw,
that was like 15 times worse. But yeah, I get it. Yeah.
When he would throw hospital passes 5 miles over the receiver's head.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm hoping that maybe gets because he is obviously a much better quarterback. He gets a little bit of a touch adjustment, is able to get those passes down and able to take advantage of his smart play ability, because he's reading the defense, he's making the smart reads. Now he just needs to get the pass there with it. So
yeah,
I'm kind of hoping, with everything that you said about taking advantage of those underneath routes, taking advantage of what the opponent gives you, I'm hoping he's able to make that adjustment for this game.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing I guess I just want to mention about Calic Manis is another thing is he kind of does hold on to the ball a little bit too long sometimes, and that's another issue, which could result in sacks. Yeah, I know, right? We've been at the game every week, so and it's his mobility, he's not. It's kind of similar to Gronowski, but he's they're both big guys. I would say Gronowski's more of a runner than Calic Manis. It's not that Calic Manis can't run, but he's a little bit slower, and sometimes he just takes sacks, or he just gets tripped up, or so if he's under pressure and he starts taking off, chances are he's not going to be able to pick it up with his legs, is I guess what I'm saying. So I guess that's another thing probably I was also watching out for. He's not the most mobile quarterback, sometimes he does hold on to the ball too long. I mean, he's been great this season, but if there's one knock on Kyle McManus so far, I would say that would probably be it.
Yeah,
So-
it'll be interesting to see how they approach his running ability. That's certainly been something that's hurt us in the past. I think about a Rocco Becht at Iowa State was, it's just as a defense, it's got to be mind numbing to kind of do everything right and then have him just scramble for
Right.
7-8 yards, pick up the first down, and you reset. So, it'll be interesting to see what Phil Parker does to try to bring pressure, push him off script, get him out of the pocket, and hopefully, into some turnovers for our sake.
Yeah,
I was going to say, I'm not hoping for no turnovers. Just now that we've kind of done like the preview on both sides, as we mentioned before, the strength versus strength, the weakness versus weakness, we're going to dive a little bit into kind of like what the game means. At least for our sake, me and Arnav have been talking about this game all off season as something that I've said 100 times on this podcast. It's on our calendar. It's circled. It's highlighted. It's dotted. It's underlined. There's a little arrows pointing to it as well. It all because it's our Blackout game.
Yeah,
We
I'm
did
so
have
excited. Yes.
Yeah, we did have a great atmosphere last year for the Blackout. With the way our schedule unfolds at the end of the season, it's not great. We get to play Illinois, Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State all at the end of the year. So we have to kind of win now to be able to qualify for bowl eligibility. So I was just kind of like wondering, on the flip side, does this game being is this just kind of like any other Big Ten game for you? Is there any special meaning for Hawkeye fans?
I think when you guys first joined the Big Ten, I think it was easy to see, the stylistically that Rutgers was similar, and I think we saw in that first matchup a 14-7 traditional Iowa rock fight. It felt like maybe this could be a rivalry type game eventually. The fact that we don't play super frequently is not, I don't think, helped that. And I would say, from an Iowa fan's perspective, obviously Big Ten West versus Big Ten East, that doesn't happen anymore. But, historically, just kind of outside of our footprint, this is not a game that we've thought about a whole lot. And, again, no disrespect to Rutgers, but like candidly looking at the schedule at the beginning of the year, I think most Iowa fans start running down the list. You come to Rutgers, check mark for a win, and keep moving. And I think that position has definitely changed over the last couple of weeks from what we've seen out of Iowa and frankly what we've seen out of Rutgers. So this definitely does have more meaning, I think, than we expected it to. And like I said, I think, from an Iowa fan perspective, this feels very pivotal for the rest of the year. Like you said, we've got some very difficult matchups still coming up, but I think, we're not looking at it from a bowl eligibility perspective. We're looking at it from a, where do we earmark a successful season? I think most Iowa fans would say, it feels like any given year the baseline is 8-4, and worse than that is an unsuccessful season. Better than that is a successful season. And if we're going to get to 8-4 this year, winning on Friday night is an absolute must. So from that perspective, like I said, it feels like it's shifted a lot since the preseason. This does feel like a very pivotal game and a must-win game for Iowa fans. But in a normal year, I don't think we would have considered this to be one that, people have circled on the calendar. Obviously, if we start losing a few of them, that's going to change in people's minds pretty quickly.
Well, kind of to respect your viewpoint there, Rutgers was awful for, I want to say, at least 3 or 4 of those matchups. Because what is it, 5-0 all time against us? So I want to say, you had the blessing of playing against the Chris Ash team, where where if they didn't come out and self-destruct on the field, it was seen as status quo.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful it's a little bit of a step up from that. But at least from a Rutgers standpoint, we have always viewed And we've always viewed Iowa as probably that second tier of the Big Ten, like at the top. Now you have your Oregons, now you have your Ohio States, your Michigans, your Penn States. They've always kind of had a league of their own. And
Right.
then underneath, you had Michigan State for a while, Iowa, Washington as well is kind of like in that tier for right now. USC is in between. They're a blue blood, but they're also a little bit of a down couple years. So they're kind of like in that tier. For us to be able to kind of punch ahead and beat somebody in that tier, in all honesty, it's probably going to be considered a very marquee win for our program, at least in the last 15 years. So it is kind of interesting to see like the two different
Yeah.
philosophies. I mean, just to kind of like butt heads, point jokes at our own team here a little bit. It's like oh man, this game means so much. It's like I don't even really know who you are.
Yeah, it's kind of been that way in the past, but yeah, I think this year, like you said, vibes are shifted because I think Rutgers is coming in better. They have a new identity, so they're not playing, the typical way. And then Iowa is also coming off a little bit more nervous. I think more improvements were expected with Gronowski, and he hasn't kind of lived up to the part. Although against UMass, he still showed that he could throw the deep ball. I mean, I think that's going to be something Rutgers might have to contend with like a little bit, but then there's also injuries. I think Rutgers going to have to kind of stack the box and contend with the run. But I mean, I guess in terms of a matchup perspective, yeah, Iowa's always been like kind of a better team. Rutgers is it's gone from like a really awful team to kind of like not so great, even though they'd win in the non-conference. And then it was kind of like, well, they should be able to beat Iowa, and then they've never really come close. But this year, it feels like there's like a real chance that maybe they do, and even if they don't, it could be a close game, and Rutgers could be seen on that level. And I think because of where Iowa's been historically, that earns Rutgers a lot of respect, and maybe even more respect than relative to the Minnesota and Washington games, which are seen in a similar tier. So, on top of momentum and bowl eligibility, like I feel like if Rutgers can beat Iowa, it puts Rutgers on the map in the conference and gives Rutgers some respect that like I think it might be a little bit overdue, but it's that they're gonna have to earn it. So I mean, if they can do that, people are gonna put Rutgers in that in that next tier now, or at least start putting them like closer to an Iowa and say, yeah, Rutgers is at least a middle of the pack team, if not maybe middle of the upper tier, which I think Rutgers has been ascending, but they've never really quite gotten to that Iowa tier. But obviously, I think a win would at least start to shift conversations in that direction, which is why I do kind of want it more than maybe even the next couple of weeks.
I will say I will push back against that too. Like you talked about deserving respect. You don't deserve respect until you go out and beat a team like that.
Yeah,
In my opinion.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would kind of have to push back against that. Did you have any thoughts on that, JP?
Yeah, I just have I mean, I don't want to push us off track, but thinking about kind of future state as an Iowa fan, we have a lot of, I don't know about conversations, but we certainly have a lot of thoughts passed around, internally on our staff about kind of future state of the Iowa program, just given where we are with the Big Ten, where we are with NIL. How do you think about the future of Rutgers football going forward? If I think back to, like I said, those glory days of the Kirk Ferentz era, a lot of they were able to pull in a lot of talent from kind of the recruiting hotbeds around New Jersey and Maryland. They supplemented with some Florida and stuff, but it feels like we're in a new world where your geography doesn't matter as much as your pocketbooks. And so, how does that position you guys going forward relative to the rest of the conference? It feels like we're in a time where kind of your historical success doesn't really matter as much as how much money can you raise to go out and get the guys that you need, and how willing is your coaching staff to kind of shake things up and go find the players you need. So it's been obviously a challenge for Iowa, but I guess I'm curious what that looks like going forward for Rutgers.
Well, in 100% honesty, Rutgers has never really owned its own state in terms of top tier talent. We've always had Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan coming in here, picking our pockets a little bit. and we're kind of getting whatever's left. Penn State especially because
True proximity, yeah.
unfortunately we don't own half our state. Penn State kind of owns South Jersey.
Yeah.
So we've never really been able to do that. So we've had to go to other areas to find talent. I mean, Shiano typically has gone into Florida. He's gone into upstate New York a lot, where some players do get overlooked.
Mhm.
Shades of Leonte Carew, what he did for Rutgers. He was from a nothing school up in who knows where, New York. And then a little bit more recently, we've gone into Georgia and we've gone into South Carolina, North Carolina, and actually done pretty well in those areas.
And Virginia, like, it's another big one too. Yeah.
Virginia too. And for in terms of NIL, like Shiano had no help with NIL for the longest time. We had a previous athletic director who basically refused to meet with our NIL collectives, and just a complete mess of a athletic director. I don't understand how you can refuse to meet with the people that are actively trying to make your programs better. But
we had a similar situation. It's shocking to think about, but yeah.
Yeah, and now that we got Kelly Zinn, who was the deputy athletic director from LSU, she now has become the full-time athletic director at Rutgers. We finally have somebody that has been in the business before, has done it before. Because, for example, our last athletic director was a professor at Seton Hall before he became to be the athletic director at Rutgers. One of the ones before him was a TV sports personality before he became to be the athletic director at Rutgers. So now at least we have somebody that's been around the block, has been in the business a little bit, and isn't just some random person that they seem to have picked off the side of the road. But personally, I'm really excited. Greg's finally going to get some help in the revenue generation department. And for us, from where we were, the mentality still is, maybe because I'm a little bit of a homer, but nowhere to go but up.
Yeah, especially with Kelly Zinn and President Tate, or William Tate from LSU, and kind of a lot of alignment going on is a big word that I've heard a lot of people around Rutgers athletics use. Everyone's on the same page. Greg Schiano's been like more of a recruiting and fundraising coach. Like, he sometimes will meet with recruits or even meet with like potential donors and take a separate plane to the games. Like, he really understands like this NIL like market and like how important it is. And he'll say, yeah, whether you like it or not, like that's the way we're going and you have to keep up with it. And I think he's ahead of some of the other programs in that, like maybe like men's basketball, though, like with Kelly Zinn, she's been a big asset to that program as well. Like, as Steve Pikel's mentioned, she's been a big asset to Greg Schiano. They've been on the same viewpoint, and obviously, as a female, obviously the women's sports and also the male non-revenue sports, she's been big for those as well. So I mean, it's just been like a huge boost in terms of the NIL and the modern thinking. I think she definitely embodies that, and she's brought in Todd Nisley from Ohio State to kind of manage the revenue. Like, she's already starting to have some good hires as well under her. So I think with Rutgers, the administration is just gonna it definitely benefits NIL, and I think that's going to be a good thing, because Rutgers has always kind of been behind on that. They've had these collectives that have been fan-led, which are all great and stuff, but they've never really had that big, and even those don't often get enough recognition or support. A lot of people don't really know what they are or don't want to donate. So now, like, Rutgers is really putting in all the stops to get the bigger donors and increase the media markets with New York and Philly. They've also, they're probably also going to drum up more fan support in the collectives as well. So kind of attacking it from all angles. I think it's going to be a really big boost to Rutgers and NIL, and the salary, the revenue sharing model. Like, they're definitely like very locked in with everything modern college athletics has to offer.
To kind of give like an analogy, to put it a little bit more simply, it's almost like Greg Schiano has been slowly taking this team up the creek without a paddle. Now he's going up the creek with a paddle. So
right.
While the other ones have been flowing down the creek. So
yeah.
Now, at least with seems to be very competent athletic department ahead, there's a lot of hope in the Rutgers community for all sports, not just for football.
Yeah, I think being in the Big Ten with the revenue sharing piece is certainly a benefit for all teams in the conference. So hopeful that all of us see that rising tide lift all boats.
Definitely.
Yeah, because in all honesty, I'd rather see the Big Ten get a lot stronger than start to be overshadowed by any other conference out there, and especially the SEC, because we don't like the SEC on this podcast here.
Nope. Yeah.
But just to kind of give a little bit of a wrap to the episode, we did want to do a couple score predictions for the game. Did you want to lead us off, JP?
Sure, I will. I'll be the homer here, and I'll give you the same prediction that's going to go out in our staff predictions tomorrow, just for consistency's sake. So,
Yeah.
From our perspective, we talked a lot about kind of those key matchups on offensive and defensive line. Can Iowa create pressure up front? We've got a long track record with Phil Parker. I'm going to put my faith in him and say that he finds a way to kind of generate some pressure up front. Mess with the timing, and then also say that the Rutgers offense gets a little impatient and does try to take a few shots. So my official prediction is we finally get a turnover generated by the Iowa defense, and that Rutgers finally loses a turnover for the first time this year. So we break two trends there. I think that turnover either directly leads to points or sets up an Iowa offense on a short field. I do think the Hawkeyes lean into that running game. I expect Rutgers to really focus on trying to take that away, but I do think, especially in the second half, we see, between Gronowski and then Kamari Moulton, I think we do see the Iowa offense be able to have some success running the ball. And so the official score prediction for me is Hawkeyes 24, Rutgers 20.
See, on the flip side, you got we do have some people that will be going against us on our site, but on the flip side, you do kind of have the two homers right here.
Yeah.
My personal thinking is that Rutgers offense kind of forces Iowa's offense into a little bit of a high scoring matchup. As you mentioned before, like the corners were a concern coming into the year. I still don't think that people recognize how how elite Rutgers wide receivers are going to be this season. I think this is where they take like a drastic step up. I think there's a little bit of a mismatch there. I had Rutgers kind of pulling Iowa into a little bit of a higher scoring game. I had Rutgers winning 27-21.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess similar to Andrew, I think Rutgers is going to be able to score some points. Not expecting like a lot, but I mean, I think they will be able to score, get a few touchdowns, a few field goals in there, move the ball, especially, using the pass game and stuff like that. But I don't know. It's Iowa. I don't think anything's going to be easy. So I think Rutgers is going to take a close game in the fourth quarter and then hang on for exhilarating 23-20 victory. So it's almost similar to your prediction, JP, but like almost like the scores are flipped, but mine's, I guess, 1 point less. But 23-20. But I guess, yeah, I mean, it depends on if, Rutgers can, kind of take Iowa out of their shell a little bit and, also stop the run. I think that's a very big thing with both Gronowski being mobile and the running backs. And I guess the third thing is special teams, like, that could have a huge impact between Rutgers coming after and blocking punts. They've especially been able to do that well at home and especially this season. And also, like, I think a player that we should mention on Iowa side is Caden Weegan, because my goodness, like, he is an electrifying returner. He's had balls punted deep to him. I saw the one against UMass returning that 95 yards for a score. So even if Rutgers coffin corners him, like, I mean, he could probably get out of it. Like, if maybe not score a touchdown, but at least, give the Hawks good field position and give them a favorable short field. But even with all that being said, I feel like, I feel like Rutgers, probably hangs on and wins the tight one in Piscataway 23-20.
So we're all hoping that the other side's wrong. I like it.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
I was going to say, we have, like I said, on our site, you'll see when it comes out tomorrow. We do have some people that did pick the Hawkeyes to win, but kind of the homers here going at it a little bit, having a nice little
Yeah,
discourse.
I've been seeing on like other people's I mean like other podcasts, and I think the common consensus between like a lot of Rutgers and Iowa fans, not all, but like everyone is gonna pick their side, but it's not even just because of it's a homer pick. There's legitimate football reasons. It's not just, oh my God, it's a blackout game and Rutgers is due for one. It's more like there's a real way and a real identity for Rutgers to be able to win the game, and I'm sure Iowa fans are thinking the same thing. They're like, we've always beaten Rutgers, and we have the identity to go out and do it again. So, like I said, it's a identity clash between the two teams, and there's legitimate reasons why both teams can win the game. And obviously, if there's a real shot at it, it's hard to pick against your team, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's definitely shaping up to be a very close game. Probably comes down to a handful of plays on either side, and that makes for a lot of fun as long as you end up on the right side of it.
Right. Yeah, should definitely be a good one. It has like a 3-4 point game for me, like written all over it, whether it's 24-21 or 27-24. Like it just feels like it's going to come down to like a one-score game. It's just a matter of which team is, on top and which one's not at the end of the day. So, yeah.
Either way, it should be a great scene in Piscataway. This is, like I said, the game that the fan base has highlighted the whole year. The blackout, something to turn out to. But that pretty much does it for everything that we have to preview here today. Unless there was something you guys wanted to add really quick.
I mean, I feel like I covered anything. I mean, if you have any like final questions about like Rutgers as a team or anything else, like, I mean, you can feel free to ask.
No, I'd say just thanks again for having me on, guys. Arnav, thanks for participating in our Q&A that went live
Oh
this
yeah.
morning. So I'll give that a quick plug, blackheartgoldpants.com. And we've got our it's called The Butcher's Word. It's a Q&A with Arnav for this matchup as well. And then we'll have some content out yet today and tomorrow, just kind of final previews of the game. So thanks again for having me, guys.
Well, thank you again for coming on with us. And as always, to our viewers for On the Banks and for the Bells Must Ring podcast, we really appreciate you guys tuning into another episode. As we've been saying in every single article and every single at the end of the last podcast as well, be loud, wear black, see you Friday, and as always, remember that the bells must ring.